Jim Candy Part 3, Chapter 4. A bunch of things happened over the Christmas break, most of them good, one of them strange, and the last one great. I turned 16 the day after school broke for the holidays. My mom took me to the Department of Licensing off Greenwood. During football season, I hadn't had much time to practice driving. Guys on the team had talked about how they'd flunked on their first try, so I was nervous, but I did okay with everything except parallel parking. At the end, the examiner handed me a sheet with the number 82 on top. "Congratulations," she said. I drove the Honda home. When we were inside, my mom gave me a lecture on driving responsibly. She'd printed off the internet a page with 20 safe driving rules, and she had me sign at the bottom of the page. "Break any of these," she said, "and you lose your driving privileges. Understood?" This is exciting. Yeah, Mick, he hasn't always liked being older than his classmates since he was held back a year, but now here it is. He's reaping the benefits of being older. He's turned 16. He passes his driving test. And yeah, his mom's nervous about it, so she makes him sign a driving contract, but he has his driver's license. And what comes with your driver's license? Freedom. That next morning, my dad came downstairs while I was eating breakfast. "I heard you passed your driving test," he said. "First try. It took me 3. I kept rolling through stop signs." He poured himself a cup of coffee. "You got anything planned for this morning?" "I was going to call Drew." "Don't. It's time I taught you how to drive the Jeep. That is, if you want to learn." "You bet I want to learn." "All right then, finish your breakfast." He stopped and gave me one of those looks that let you know there's a joke you're not in on. "I know, the perfect place." He took 15th across the Ballard Bridge and turned toward Discovery Park. He wound along one of the wooded park roads for a while and then made a quick turn into a driveway and put on the brakes. "Okay, let's switch seats." I looked up. In front of me were hundreds of tombstones. "This is a cemetery." He laughed. "Like I said, the perfect place to learn." Think back to when you were learning how to drive, right? Where did you go to practice? Normally it's some sort of like deserted parking lot somewhere, side roads, things like that. So if you think about it, a cemetery is a perfect place to practice. Normally there's not much traffic there. It turned out he was right. There were no other cars, not one. So when I screwed up engaging the clutch and the Jeep lurched forward and then died, which happened a lot, nobody was behind to honk. The roads in the cemetery meandered, turning this way and that, so I was constantly shifting back and forth from second to third to second. All through it were rolling hills that gave me a chance to practice engaging the clutch and working the emergency brake. It took a while, but after an hour I had the knack. "You're pretty good," my dad said when he took the wheel back. "A couple more times and you'll be ready to go on the road." Then came the strange thing. Instead of going home, my dad drove over to I-5. "Where are we going?" I said. "You'll see." We went north to Mount Lake Terrace, and he wound his way through a bunch of back roads. "There," he said, pointing to a billboard. "Gun range. First timers free," the sign promised. He followed a gravel road about half a mile before pulling into the parking lot. "You're 16, he said. "Time you learned how to fire a gun." "A gun? What for?" "Something every man should know how to do." We got out of the Jeep and walked across the parking lot. When my dad pushed open the door, little bells rang. A leathery-faced guy behind the counter was watching an NBA game on the television. "What can I do for you?" he said. "Is the first time really free?" my dad asked. He laughed. "Not exactly. It'll end up costing you $10. What do you want to shoot?" "Not me, my son. I want him to learn how to shoot a gun." "What size?" "You got a little Colt he could use? A revolver?" "Sure. You want to show him, or do you want me to?" "I'd rather you did it," my dad said. "I'm no expert." "That'll cost a little more." "No problem." The leathery guy turned to me. "Okay, son, this way." We walked through a door to an indoor firing range. Before he did anything else, Bert Bronson, that was the name on the guy's shirt, gave me the rundown on gun safety. Then he nodded toward a target pinned up on the opposite wall and handed me a Colt revolver. "Let's see what kind of eye you got." The whole thing had seemed like a joke until Bert handed me the gun. When I felt the cold metal in my hand, everything changed. It was small, not much bigger than my hand. Still, it was a real gun with real bullets. You hold a gun, and you've got life or death in your hand. I listened carefully as Bert gave me some tips on holding a gun and aiming it and on squeezing the trigger. A little revolver like this doesn't have much recoil, he said, but it takes some getting used to. He was right. At first, the gun kept jumping in my hand, making me fire way high, but after a while I was able to hit the target, if not the bullseye. Good enough, Bert Bronson said. This isn't exactly a marksman's gun. We walked back to the lobby area. The NBA game was over, and my dad was sitting on a plastic chair reading a newspaper. That's it, he said. Not a whole lot to a little Colt, Bert said. Kind of a squirt gun with a jolt. Now, if you'd like him to learn how to handle a rifle, that's different. Another time, my dad said. He went to the counter and paid. I appreciate your help. Don't mention the gun range to your mom, he said as he backed the Jeep up and returned to the road. She wouldn't understand. This is an interesting chapter because the book really takes a break from football and shows what's going on outside of football in Mick's life. And it's an exciting time for him. As we said earlier in the chapter, he gets his driver's license. He gets to practice with his dad's Jeep, which he hasn't been able to do at all. And then you have this weird happenstance afterwards where he goes to the gun range with his dad. And it's an interesting part of the book because his dad admits that, he doesn't really shoot guns. And yet he thinks it's kind of like this rite of passage thing for Mick to go and learn how to shoot a gun. And Mick's never expressed interest in, learning how to shoot a gun before. So this is just something that his dad has decided he needs to do. And it's good to also see he and his dad hanging out and doing something other than football and having the pressure of his dad wanting him to be perfect at football put on him. So this is just an interesting little side chapter for Mick and what is going on in his life.